The conservative voice warning of constitutional crisis. Judge Michael Luttig on Trump's war against the judiciary. In the escalating battle between the Trump administration and the federal judiciary, few voices carry more weight than that of retired Judge J. Michael Luttig. A towering figure in conservative legal circles, Luttig has emerged as one of the most prominent judicial voices warning that President Trump's attacks on the courts represent nothing less than an assault on the constitutional order itself. The conservative pedigree. Judge Luttig's conservative credentials are impeccable and run deep through the very foundations of the modern conservative legal movement. Appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit by President George H.W. Bush in 1991 at just 37 years old, Luttig became one of the youngest federal appellate judges in history. But his conservative bona fides were established long before his judicial appointment. Luttig's career reads like a roadmap through conservative legal institutions. He served as assistant counsel to President Ronald Reagan from 1981-1982, then clerked for then-Judge Antonin Scalia on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals from 1982-1983. He followed this with a Supreme Court clerkship for Chief Justice Warren Burger, one of the most influential conservative justices in modern history. Luttig later served as Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel under President George H.W. Bush, where he provided crucial assistance during the Supreme Court confirmation processes of Justices David Souter and Clarence Thomas. During his 15 years on the federal bench, Luttig established himself as a conservative judicial heavyweight, often compared to Justice Scalia for his analytical rigor and uncompromising constitutional philosophy. His influence extended far beyond his own opinions. More than 40 of his law clerks, nicknamed litigators, went on to clerk at the Supreme Court, predominantly for conservative justices like Scalia and Thomas. He was twice considered for nomination to the Supreme Court by Republican presidents, cementing his status as a leading conservative legal mind. Luttig's judicial philosophy centered on strict adherence to constitutional text and original meaning. He authored significant conservative opinions, including the Fourth Circuit decision striking down portions of the Violence Against Women Act, later upheld by the Supreme Court in United States v. Morrison, and consistently supported conservative positions on federalism, the death penalty, and constitutional interpretation. The warning bell. Given this sterling conservative pedigree, Luttig's warnings about the Trump administration's attacks on the judiciary carry extraordinary weight. Since Trump's return to office in January 2025, Luttig has emerged as perhaps the most vocal conservative critic of what he characterizes as an unprecedented assault on judicial independence and the rule of law. In a remarkable March 2025 op-ed in the New York Times titled, "It's Trump versus the Courts, and it won't end well for Trump," Luttig argued that Trump has wasted no time in his second term in declaring war on the nation's federal judiciary, the country's legal profession and the rule of law. The former judge warned that Trump has provoked a constitutional crisis with his stunning frontal assault on the third branch of government in the American system of justice. Luttig's warnings center on a pattern of behavior that he argues threatens the constitutional separation of powers. The judge has documented how Trump views the justice system as a partisan instrument used against him, particularly following his prosecutions for attempting to overturn the 2020 election and mishandling classified documents, charges that effectively stalled upon his re-election. The Boasberg case, a constitutional flashpoint. The focal point of Luttig's concerns has been Trump's treatment of U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, who presided over a case challenging the administration's use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members. When Judge Boasberg issued orders temporarily blocking these deportations to ensure due process, Trump's response was swift and unprecedented. In a March 2025 Truth Social post, Trump called Boasberg a radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator, and demanded his impeachment, writing in capital letters, "This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached." The demand for impeachment came after the Department of Justice had already asked an appeals court to remove Boasberg from the case entirely. This attack prompted an extraordinary response from Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, who issued a rare public statement. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. The broader pattern of intimidation. Luttig has identified the Boasberg incident as part of a broader campaign of judicial intimidation. During Trump's second term, at least 60 judges or appeals courts have slowed or blocked administration initiatives, leading to what legal experts describe as an unprecedented level of threats and harassment against the federal judiciary. According to Reuters reporting that Luttig has referenced, threats against judges and their families have increased by 327% since Trump's return to office. The families of at least 11 federal judges who have ruled against the Trump administration have been specifically targeted with threats and harassment. Online platforms have featured calls for at least 51 federal judges to be fired, arrested or killed, according to the investigation. The pattern extends beyond rhetoric. In a particularly troubling development, the FBI arrested Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Duggan at her courthouse in March 2025, charging her with allegedly helping an unauthorized immigrant evade ICE. The arrest, photographed and publicized on social media by FBI Director Kash Patel, prompted Attorney General Pam Bondi to describe it as sending a very strong message that we will come after you and we will prosecute you. A bipartisan response to the gravity of these threats prompted an unprecedented response from the legal community. More than 150 former federal and state judges, appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents, signed a bipartisan letter to Attorney General Bondi protesting both Duggan's arrest and the administration's broader threats against the judiciary. Luttig, as one of the letter's lead signatories, stated, "I have spent my career upholding the Constitution. I never imagined I'd see a judge treated like this in America. The arrest and prosecution of judges is where rule by law ends and authoritarianism begins. The judiciary is the last obstacle to a president with designs on tyrannical rule." Historical parallels and constitutional stakes. Perhaps most alarmingly, Luttig has drawn explicit parallels between Trump's behavior and the monarchical tyranny that the American founders rejected in the Revolutionary War. In his writings and television appearances, Luttig has consistently argued that Trump's efforts to undermine judicial independence represent a fundamental threat to the constitutional order established in 1787. Mr. Trump appears to have forgotten that Americans fought the Revolutionary War to secure their independence from the British monarchy and establish a government of laws, not of men, Luttig wrote, citing Thomas Paine's principle that, in America the law is king. He has warned that Trump's actions mirror the arbitrary exercise of power that led the founders to establish an independent judiciary as a check on executive authority. Luttig has been particularly critical of Trump's invocation of expansive executive powers, including the use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, previously used only during declared wars, to justify deportations without due process. For not one of his signature initiatives during his first 100 days in office does Trump have the authority under the Constitution and laws of the United States that he claims, Luttig wrote in a May 2025 analysis. The consequences of constitutional crisis. In his warnings, Luttig has outlined the potential consequences of Trump's war against the judiciary. He argues that if the president continues to attempt to usurp the authority of the courts, it will force a constitutional confrontation where it will be up to the Supreme Court, Congress and the American people to step forward and say, enough. The judge has predicted that Trump's overreach will ultimately backfire, writing that a rebuke from the nation's highest court in his wish for war with the nation's federal courts could well cripple Mr. Trump's presidency and tarnish his legacy. He has emphasized that courts, not presidents, determine the law, citing Chief Justice John Marshall's landmark assertion in Marbury v. Madison that it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is. The stakes for democracy. Luttig's warnings extend beyond immediate legal concerns to fundamental questions about American democracy. In his June 2022 testimony before the House January 6 committee, Luttig declared that Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger to American democracy, not because of what happened on January 6, but because they have told us they plan to do it again. His current warnings about judicial intimidation follow the same theme. Luttig has argued that threats against judges are ultimately threats to constitutional government. It's as simple as that. He has warned that the pattern of retaliation and intimidation represents an authoritarian playbook designed to pressure the judiciary into compliance with executive demands. A conservative's constitutional stand. What makes Luttig's warnings particularly powerful is their source. This is not criticism from liberal judicial activists or Democratic partisans, but from one of the most respected conservative legal minds of his generation. His willingness to speak out against a Republican president reflects what he sees as a duty that transcends party politics. "I felt that I had a profound obligation to the country to speak and to explain all of what had happened," Luttig said in a 2023 interview, reflecting on his decision to publicly oppose Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. That same sense of constitutional duty now drives his warnings about threats to judicial independence. Luttig's stance represents a particular type of conservatism, one rooted in respect for constitutional institutions and the rule of law rather than partisan loyalty. His criticism of Trump reflects a belief that true conservatism requires defending the constitutional order that conservatives claim to champion, even when that defense comes at political cost. The path forward. In his recent writings and public statements, Luttig has emphasized that the ultimate resolution lies with the American people. Trump will continue his assault on America, its democracy, and rule of law until the American people finally rise up and say, "No more," he wrote in May 2025. The judge has consistently argued that the courts will hold against Trump's pressure, but at a cost. "The courts are holding," Judge Luttig writes, "and will continue to hold, but the damage to public confidence in judicial institutions may be lasting." He has warned that even if the immediate crisis passes, the precedent of executive intimidation of the judiciary represents a dangerous erosion of constitutional norms. Conclusion. A voice from conservative conscience. Judge Michael Luttig's warnings about Trump's attacks on the judiciary represent more than legal analysis. They constitute a cry from the conservative conscience about the direction of American constitutionalism. His impeccable conservative credentials make his warnings impossible to dismiss as partisan criticism, while his deep understanding of constitutional law lends gravity to his assessment of the current crisis. As Trump's confrontation with the judiciary continues, Luttig's voice serves as a reminder that the defense of constitutional institutions is not a partisan issue but a fundamental requirement of American democracy. His warnings suggest that the current moment represents a test not just of judicial independence, but of whether the constitutional system established by the founders can withstand the pressures of authoritarian governance. The question now is whether other conservative voices will join Luttig in defending the constitutional order they claim to revere, or whether partisan loyalty will continue to trump constitutional principle. In Judge Luttig's view, the survival of American democracy may well depend on the answer. Thanks for watching. Stay stronger, stay smarter, stay informed. Like and subscribe for more information and updates.